Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Mage, Errant, Book 3, A Traitor in Skyhold, chapters 34, 35, and 36. Bakori ascends, don't forget to chew your food, and breathing room. In these chapters, we have the final confrontation with Bakori, and I say final with a big asterisk after it. And we find out some of the bigger plan, but not all of it. Definitely not all of it. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you so much to Dan for commissioning this episode. What's up, Dan? Whoop, whoop. I am, again, just amazed that we're going to be starting off the fourth book soon. We have gotten through these really quick. And this one, I feel like the first two had a lot more twists that I wasn't expecting. This one had mostly, like, it went in, I won't say entirely in a way I was expecting, but it was like what we all, I'm pretty sure, as we're reading, start to pick up on, is that our friends are being set up, that some of the folks that Candoron doesn't really enjoy working with or trust are the ones that are mysteriously left out of the equation, and that there's like a high likelihood that Sabae's grandmother is going to wind up being involved. Even though I know that her and Candoron are not supposed to be buddies, it just felt, it felt like they were on the same page here. When she left, I was just feeling like, I don't feel like she's not really going, or she's going with the full knowledge of what's happening and is like an active part of this at the very least, and has like given her blessing. And it turns out to kind of be both, because she did go, but she can go and still be there, as it turns out, which is pretty dope. And I have no problem, I just want to state for the record, with things going the way that I expect. Like, it can always be a fun thing to be caught by surprise and, you know, have my expectations subverted, but it's not a total requirement. You can do something that I'm sort of expecting, and if it's done well, it doesn't really matter. So I just want to mention that I don't have a problem with, like, having picked up on this, and I feel that the way that it's written, it feels to me the author wanted us to pick up on a lot of this. Like, this was his intention. So, all right, let's start off with 34, and we are still fighting Bakori here. And we have still got this fucking Abila to deal with, and she is out here throwing her fireballs and drawing magma up through the floor, and everything is just really kind of chaotic. And Bakori is like out here cackling. It's a very, I have got to say how much I enjoy. This is my like feeling. And I may be wrong on this, but what I think John Bierce is doing is giving us a comfortingly familiar type of YA villain to start things off with. I feel like he's got Bakori out here doing the monologuing, doing the maniacal laughter, looking like a maniac with his fucking tadpole belly and his swarms of minions that are, you know, running around and killing people. And then when he needs them, he can just dissolve them and suck them back into himself to restore body parts. And this is all fairly standard fare in terms of the big bads that kids face a lot of the time. Like, not to say that we don't have ones that are much more human, but the attitude that he takes, the sort of self-involved drama queen thing that he has got going on is familiar, right? And what I suspect is that Bierce is giving us this baddie and sort of like easing our way into things. And he is going to start surprising us a little bit as time goes on. I really get the feeling, based on the way that these 3 books have sort of escalated issues, that he wants to make things more adult. And he is trying to give a little bit of a bridge between something that feels more serious and something that feels more appropriate for younger kids. And, I've mentioned before that there is some swearing in these books. There is some hinting at things that are more adult than in a lot of YA. But for the most part, it has felt like we're in stomping grounds we all recognize. And I think that that's purposeful. So we'll see. But I'm really, really interested to see, because like the way he just keeps sort of having Bakori do his thing, but everybody is always commenting on it and sort of like making fun of the fact that Bakori is he's just regular. He's real regular degular, in terms of the big bad. I've got to think that this is the author being like, yeah, I know. And trust me, I'm fully aware of this as well, and I need to acknowledge that so that you guys don't all think that I believe this guy is a super original baddie. So this fight is continuing, and Hugh, who has like no mana left, tries tapping into his stellar affinity and is thinking about using that Starbolt spell, which is the one that it's like the only incredibly offensive spell that he's got that is much more for combat, and it's the one also that drains his mana like completely, because it is so it just consumes, but it's this thing that he was told, if you are going to go all out and you have one shot to do it with, then here's this. And he goes to do it, and bless his boots, it doesn't do anything. The spell form immediately collapses, but his Stella mana reservoir still drained as though he'd cast the spell, which is truly unfair. And Bakori says, yeah, babe, your master uses those a lot. I know how to deal with them. It's not really going to work on me ever again, because I've gotten very used to defending against these. So yeah, my condolences to you, but that's played out. I gotta say, y'all, that hurt. That was a bummer. I just really felt for you in that moment. He thought he had a fucking a bazooka in his back pocket that he was waiting to whip out, and then that shit just fizzled and died. Oh, that is so embarrassing. Then it's when Godric says, hold on tight, all that magma is about to break loose in a moment. And it explodes outwards. The stone underneath them erupts, sending them flying towards the edge of the mountain. I'm sorry, guys. I'm not sick. I don't think I'm sick. I think it's just allergies, but I sound so stuffy right now. And I know my brain is a little slower than normal because I'm real fuzzy. I've been taking cold medicine, allergy medicine as well, but the symptoms are so cold-like that I was like, let me just take some cold medicine. And cold medicine can really make me fucking feel loopy. It is weird how, I don't know, this shit, it makes sense to me that this is the stuff they buy to make meth. That's all I'm saying. So Dinah was floating 50 feet above the floor, cycling through lightning and venom spells as fast as they could. They'd even drawn out the venom from Bakori's tail to launch at Abila, which mostly seemed to amuse the demon. And I really do think that is a neat idea, that they're pulling venom out of Bakori. I was a bit annoyed that Bakori seems amused because I was hoping that he'd at least be like, hey, get out of there. But instead, it's like, it feels like it's such a wasted effort that Bakori is just laughing. And I'm like, that really blows. Everything that everybody is doing here feels like a losing proposition, right? Tariq throws a boulder. Bakori catches it and shreds it. Rutless had surrounded himself with a sphere of supercooled salt water and was rolling it off the side of the mountain to escape, which, given what Hugh knew of Rutless, didn't surprise him at all. And we find out that Rutless does indeed survive for a little while. That shit catches up with him because life comes at you fast in Skyhold. That was, you guys, I'm just jumping ahead a little bit here, but Kandaron eats him, and I have got to tell you what, I was pleased to see it. I love an ally who is willing to eat guys who disappoint her. I can't even be mad. Does this indicate that maybe Kandaron is a little bit less the broad that I want her to be in terms of her altruism? Perhaps. But as somebody who is not particularly altruistic herself, I really have to say, I find it really refreshing that we're just going to sidestep any, courts, any due process here. This man ran away. That was not what he was meant to do. And she is going to equalize him and make him not an issue anymore. And there is something about the simplicity of that. I recognize why we have due process, because our system is deeply corrupt and needs some sort of checks and balances, and that is absolutely fair and true. However, when those checks and balances are only used for certain people, the due process thing feels like a bit of a joke. And you've got, people who are able to shoot children with impunity, and then they just get fired. That's all they get. And then they just go and live their lives and maybe sometimes even become a cop in another area, and nothing happens to them because they are protected in a certain way. And it would be really cool if after we had video of a grown man shooting a child or assaulting somebody without any warrant or process of any kind, if we could just feed them to a monster, I would be fine with that. It would be super cool. I am just fully on board for monsters to eat bad guys who otherwise would get away with absolutely fucking everything. So just going on record for that. And MX Shard in the chat says, Kandaron is awesome, but she's also not human. And that's surprising how often I get surprised by remembering that. Yeah. Later on, at one point, Alustin says something like, Kandaron really doesn't care that much about human life. And I was like, oof, cold-blooded. But I do kind of appreciate that he sees her clearly and can say that. And that he's willing to say it. And that the kids don't really react in such a way that feels like, how can you say that? I'm shocked. They're all just sort of like, well, I guess that's a factor we're going to have to consider in the future. Everybody is pretty realist about the nature of Kandaron's priorities. And I think that's what else are you going to do? Kandaron is just so much more powerful than anybody they are close to. You've got to be able to come to terms with things like that if you know the inevitability of this person being in charge. So anyway, Hugh could feel the book trembling at his side, but he felt a smile creeping across his face as his hand dove into his pocket for something he always made sure to keep there. And he gets out the chalk and he's about to draw. And then Abila looks at them, and she launches a bunch of lava, and Hugh is like, fuck. So, we have Sabae, and she is down here in her, like, water armor that is beginning to steam. And she apparently had an idea of what Kandaron's plan was, and is up here expecting somebody to step in, it seems like, and it's not happening. And we find out later that it's Hugh's book that's blocking this, because the method by which her grandmother would intervene is scrying, and Hugh's book is keeping that from happening. And I really do enjoy that Sabae is the only one that seems to really get what's going on. This is what is... I find this, and I know I keep kind of going off into sort of side tangents here. In this way, I will wind up covering everything, but it is not exactly, front to back the way that I know is easiest to keep track of. But Sabae is a really fun choice of, like... So the thing... God, I'm so sorry that I keep making these Harry Potter, like, comparisons. I really am, even though I know that in some ways I feel like this author is purposely doing what he's doing to, like, correct some problems with Harry. You know what I mean? I kind of hate myself for running back to this comparison all the time. At the same time, it just feels like other people have to also be doing the same thing and thinking the same way. So while I feel a little bit like fucking basic, I also want to use terms and language and characters that I know most people are going to recognize. And it's a nice shorthand that's really easy for doing that. So I hope you guys can bear with me. In Harry Potter, Harry is occasionally the one that manages to put two and two together. But a lot of the time, it's Hermione. And Hermione is still, despite everything, we're only ever in Harry's perspective except for a very few moments in later books. And we never are in Hermione or Ron's perspective. And so it can be kind of frustrating, because even though Harry is the main character and he is the chosen one and the guy who gets so much credit, he isn't super smart. He is not the one connecting the dots and observing. And Hermione is just the person doing that work for him and feeding him the answers he needs, which, JK seems aware of that, even because there's a scene in which he's being questioned kind of by McGonagall, who, when Harry parrots back things that Hermione said to him, McGonagall is like, well, at least you're listening to Hermione Granger, because it's obvious that Harry doesn't quite get the implications of things that are happening around him. And what I like about this series so far is that we go to different perspectives. We are all over the place. And even though Hugh feels like the main character in a general way, I also feel like maybe that's only feeling like the case because we start off in his perspective more than anybody else's. But I'm sort of wondering if what we're going to get here, because those of you who watched the TV show The Magicians, I don't know about the books, I never read them, but the TV show starts off with somebody as a main character and then starts to sort of pursue other character POVs a lot more aggressively as seasons go on, until that person is kind of just one in the mix and not the main character. And there's a sense of, well, we felt like we had to do it this way because we knew that people would only really respond if there was a straight white guy as our main, like we're all used to. And then we could sneak in the perspectives of other people and nobody would really notice it or, have a reaction to it because it would be like they're supporting cast still. And so they're not a threat. And I know this was also a thing that they did with Orange is the New Black. They had a main character who was a blonde white woman, and they fit in all of these other character stories around her so as to give them a chance to have their stories told, but not make the audience feel like they have to be constantly in the perspective of somebody that's a minority or who isn't straight, like just, it's a really sad thing that we have to do this, but I also respect the savviness of making that choice. And I'm sort of thinking that also might be something that we're getting with Bierce here, is that he opens us with Hugh. We're in Hugh's head a lot of the time, and we tend to be in his perspective, I think, the most out of everybody, but we do jump around quite a bit. And I wouldn't be surprised if he's like, no, I wanted to have other characters be my like, be as important, but I didn't want to scare people off, unfortunately, because people are cowards, by having there be like a black main character or a gay man main character. So in all of this, when Hermione is over here like helping Harry put two and two together, I would often think like, man, Harry, if you didn't have her, I don't know what good you'd even be. And what I find really fun here is that Sabae is putting two and two together, but she's not telling Hugh. Sabae is having a private conversation with Alustin by the end of this, and is talking with him about the realities of what everybody just went through without including the rest of her friends. And I think that's very significant, and it shows to me that as much as Sabae is a team player and cares about her friends and everything, I feel like she really either doesn't trust them, or she has, like, I don't want to say doesn't trust them like in a flat out sense, because she definitely trusts them in a general way. But it seems as if she is thinking, if they don't have this information, that is somehow going to be better. And I'm not really sure where that's coming from. The only place that I can say that I think that's coming from is that Sabae is actually more invested in her family's success than she seems like she would be. After the way that she has been treated by her family, I think the natural assumption a lot of us would make is that she is just kind of giving them the finger and going to do her thing. But I think Sabae is actually more invested in them than you would expect. And that makes sense to me, because a lot of people are not treated super well by their family, and they are still very devoted to them for reasons that make no sense to me personally. So that, in combination with the fact that she is obviously really quick with politics, with figuring out the powers that are in question and their motivating factors. And I think that her grandmother is very quickly realizing how keen and savvy Sabae is, and is potentially going to start grooming her to take her place. And I don't know what the deal is with like the lifespan of human beings in this world, and whether or not Sabae's grandmother is like ever going to die anytime soon. But you have to, like, to be a really good leader in this sense, you've got to be a lot more than just powerful with magic. You have got to be able to see the whole board in front of you and understand each piece's capabilities and how they react in response to the actions of another. And Sabae's friends just don't either seem that interested in that aspect of things, or it is just not something that they're capable of seeing that way. And so I'm really curious to see how Sabae progresses, because she definitely feels like she's in an entirely different league from the rest of our crew. And it's a kind of a fun situation to have her doing this, like, having these like intrigues and conversations without them, because I'm curious what they're going to think if they begin to figure things out finally and realize that she has sort of known all along. She has this moment, like I said, where she like thinks she knows what the plan is going to be, but nothing's happening and she's waiting for something. And I don't get the impression any of her friends know that she's waiting for something. She hasn't given them any reason to believe this is part of a particular plan. So anyway, so we have this moment where Godric bellows, the head of his sledgehammer cracked. It started to shake, and a brilliant white light poured out of the cracks. Godric threw the hammer with all the force his arm and steel magic could provide. It flew so quickly that Hugh was buffeted backward by the wind generated by the hammer's flight. The hammer exploded just before it reached the descending cloud of lava bombs. A massive shock wave surged forward, catching the lava bombs in mid-flight, scattering them off their paths and breaking them into droplets. It actually pushed the lava wave back a few feet and knocked Godric and Hugh back farther toward the end of the chamber, even though the blast was directed away from them. And Godric is laughing, but he is very upset because he has lost another hammer. And like, that hammer, man, that was a fucking gift from Indris. Like, that was valuable. I can't tell you guys, I get very attached to tools and items and anything that gives a sense of like having stability and a backup plan in stories. And then when those things go away or get destroyed, it hurts me. And I think this comes from being a person who grew up without very much, and I had to guard what I did have pretty carefully because it wasn't easy to replace. And I'm just hoping that the way these guys performed here in the face of a literal attack from a demon is going to warrant a very, what's the word I want? Handsome replacement for this hammer. I really hope so. Because, like, that's a huge loss. That sucks. So fucking Abila is still throwing bombs. And then we have Anders, and he pops up and he is like, all right, it's time, kiddos. And he starts to fight back with his silk. And it's pretty fun to watch. I'm not going to get into all of this. And when I say watch, it's obviously like, you know, mentally watching. But, I was glad to see that he like kept in with everybody and was not running the fuck away like certain people. And despite the fact that he did betray the council, he doesn't get killed. He just gets made into a pawn for Kandaron, who she tells him, you're going to tell my enemies what I tell you to tell them. So it's kind of funny because like we know that Kandaron and what is her name? Indira? I can't remember. Sabae's grandma. They're working together in some ways, but they're like obviously not showing one another their full hands. And he's reporting to her. So we've been given to believe. I might be wrong about that, but I think so. And Kandaron is going to have him feeding her false information. So I'm kind of fascinated to see that. He seems to accept that he's lucky he didn't get eaten, but you can also sense his indignation at being put in the position of just puppeting, you know? So let's see. It turns out Bakori doesn't decay glyphs or enchantments, but I don't have enough silk to keep this up for much longer. I'm going to try and rescue Sabae, and then we're retreating. A web of silk threads descended toward Bakori, then simply passed through him. The demon collapsed into a pile of what Godric could only describe as chunks, none bigger than Godric's fist. Within seconds, half the imps in the council chamber dissolved, and Bakori was already climbing back to his feet, looking unamused. And I do really appreciate how often we see Bakori like get destroyed and then come back to himself. There's a moment later where Talia uses one of her weapons and he is like basically just a pair of legs. And let's see. Hugh was pawing at his back urgently, muttering "ow" over and over again. It was Talia's tracking pin. A massive explosion tore out of the stairwell, sending imps and chunks of imps flying through the air. Through the smoke, Godric could see flashes of purple-green dream fire. I love Talia for this. And I love that she's like sort of thinking to herself what's going on. And, you know, she has been out of it with Ava this whole time. And where is it? Oh, here it is. Godric had told her the proper names for all of Abila's known combat spells when they were studying her, but right now Talia couldn't care less about spell names. The damn woman was trying to kill her friends. And I don't know why, but that line really made me laugh. The damn woman. So she chucks this dagger, and a writhing column of dream fire as thick as her torso shot out of her outstretched hands. Talia felt like it should make a noise, but it was utterly silent as it streaked toward Abila. Talia could feel not heat, but something radiate off the beam of dream fire. She'd never used this much dream mana at once or attempted a spell this large before. Abila desperately lifted a wave of molten rock to block the oncoming beam, but it punched through without slowing or shrinking noticeably, and the wave dissolved into butterfly-winged fish, which in turn simply faded into mist. The beam struck Abila, and the woman erupted into a burst of caustic sounds, tastes heavier than stone, and colors that rasped across the skin like a cat's tongue, even from where Talia stood. Which I really do enjoy this author just like playing with senses and the words that you would normally use to go along with senses. I think that's always like a neat idea, because you may read it and feel like that feels sort of nonsensical, but I think a lot of us understand the way that could work, you know, especially if you're neurodivergent and you tend to have a reaction sometimes to things in a way that you can't really explain. Colors that give a headache. I mean, that one I just really understand. And let's see, the magma simply collapsed to the ground instantly, splashing and rolling. Talia's mana reservoir emptied completely. The beam flickered out like it had never happened. Bakori's torso had already grown back up to his ribcage, which I just thought, again, that's just so unfair, like how fast this happens. Christ's sake, you know? When she brings him down to just a pair of legs, I was feeling like maybe that would hold a bit longer. But I should have realized Bakori literally just turns into a bunch of chunks and comes back. And not even his legs were left in that scenario. And he still came back pretty quick. So I guess. So Talia says, Hugh, make your books stop blocking scrying. And then here comes Elinia Candas, that is her name, Elinia Candas, and Bakori was yanked into the sky. So, I love this so much. She tells Talia, well done, dearie, and there is just something about these two. They're peas in a pod, you know? I think that she needs Sabae's mental acuity, and that is what is going to make her a good leader. But I think that she is going to have a major soft spot for Talia moving forward, because Talia obviously has like some of her killer instincts in this way. Bakori's voice drifted to them on the wind. How is this possible? You're hundreds of leagues away. I'm exactly 100 leagues away, little demon, well within my range, but far out of the range of your vile little spell form wrecking field. And all of a sudden he was like, oh, this is how she was able to watch me. Okay. Back in Therastel. Who do you think you are? You know damn well who I am. And you know damn well how long of a list of titles I have. Right now, though, all you need to know is that I'm the woman whose granddaughter you just tried to kill. Bakori barely had time to scream before the storm cloud shaped like Sabae's grandmother tossed the demon into her castle-sized mouth and began to chew. Streamers of vomit-colored energy began to pour up from Skyhold to regenerate Bakori's wounds. And I'm watching this and I'm just kind of like, okay, wait, how is this gonna happen? It was sunset when Bakori finally died in a vomit-shaded explosion that punched out from between the storm's lips. That, Ilinia said, was disgusting. Talia sighed. I want to be your grandmother when I get old, Sabae. So, look, we've thought Bakori was dead once, and he wasn't. I'm willing to accept he's dead here, but I'm not going to trust it. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I until further notice, okay, we'll say he's dead. But we have been wrong before. That's all I'm saying. So, I believe mostly that he is dead. I think this is supposed to be it. But, that's all. Alestin returned a day later, and Kandarin and the remaining counselors soon after that. Over 200 people had died, most of them trained battle mages. Amazingly, less than a tenth of the casualties had been students, despite the huge number of them in and near the labyrinth during the breakout. Sabae had strong suspicions regarding that, but she hadn't voiced them to anyone yet. And later on, when she talks to Alestin, her assertion is Kandarin has a soft spot for the young and made sure to have them protected better than the rest, which turns out to pretty much be accurate. You knew exactly who the traitor was from the start, didn't you? Alestin nodded. We did. Well, we didn't know that Anders was selling secrets, but Kandarin knew Abila was working for Bakori the instant he sent her the order to vote against the alternate test. And Talia is just like, well, then what the fuck? This was all for nothing. And Sabae's like, well, not nothing. They wanted us to be bait. So they had to have us like poking and prying. And there is like this, you guys figured out there was a second traitor. Ava figured it out. Alestin paused at that. Wait, Ava did what now? And they have to tell him. And Alestin is like, all right, how about just we don't tell Kandarin about the part where Hugh's girlfriend discovers all of our secrets. Can we just not tell her that part? And I was like, that seems like a good plan to me. I'm sure like she'll figure it out probably, but no, good call in my opinion. I love Alestin saying that Talia predicted this exact outcome. 2 traitors, one of whom was Anders. And Talia's like, I guess life can be like a story, can't it? And Sabae's like, oh my god, I'm never going to hear the end of this. Correct. You will not. So let's see. He moved far ahead of when we anticipated him to based on our scouting. If he'd waited a few more years, he could have flooded Skyhold with more imps than Kandarin and the full council could have dealt with easily. And when Godric says something about his dad and being really angry, Alestin says, all right, so things weren't like, they didn't go exactly according to plan. You were supposed to have some people like guarding your backs in the labyrinth, but you gave them the slip really early on, so nobody knew where you went and what was happening. And they all figure that that's probably Godric's hammer, that like, you know, if they're dead ass silent, it'll be harder to track them. The 4 of you were never intended to fight your way through an army of imps, engage in a running battle with said imps, all the way through the mountain, expose a traitor, engage in combat with the traitor, and he names all of the things. You were just supposed to be escorted to a hidden safe house we'd established in the labyrinth after you picked up your tokens, until Bakori was dead and the threat was over. And it just didn't work out that way. So I do enjoy this because, like, I thought that part of it was that they were supposed to, like, lure Bakori in a certain direction initially, but considering that there is this, like, hidden area in the council chamber, it really didn't make sense, like, why they would even be needed. And it turns out they weren't really needed. They just took some shit upon themselves. And let's see. What is the council guarding? What's with that weird metal seal? And this is a fun one. Lustin is like, oh, thank God. A question that I can answer that I don't feel like is kind of upsetting. It's the entrance to an extraplanar vault Kandarin built soon after the founding of Skyhold. And it can only be opened midsummer and winter, and it contains some real dangerous shit. The only known egg of an Isendarin queen held in stasis, which is that what's her face? What's an Isendarin? Is an Isendarin a type of dragon? Is that Indris? Or, because they don't know still that he actually did steal the egg, right? A red ether crystal sword that generates uncontrollable, nigh inextinguishable, wildfires. A sphere that corrupts and twists people's affinities permanently and horribly. A 4-foot-long tuning fork that can generate mana deserts lasting decades. A pair of sentient leather boots that has a habit of assassinating rulers in ridiculous ways. Alustin had an odd look on his face. And those are just some of the tamer items. I feel like it would be easy to destroy a pair of boots, Talia said. You'd really think so, Alustin muttered irritably. I'll lend you its files sometime. And I'm like, Alustin had to go up against those boots, didn't he? And shit did not go according to plan. So he says near the back of the vault is a rather delicate wand made of some sort of chitin. She's fairly convinced Bakori could use it to destroy the labyrinth. And that's what he was after. So that makes sense. And Sabae then says, what has Kandarin got you and the other librarian errants looking for? And Alustin just answers her. And I thought this was kind of weird in the moment. Looking for the lost city of Imperial Ithos, the weapon that Kandarin and the other Skyhold founders built to exile it out of our universe and make the entire world, including themselves, forget its location, is failing. We expect the city to return to our world in a matter of just a few years. Half the nations and great powers on Ithos are scrambling to figure out where it will re-emerge, while the other half have realized something is going on and are trying to figure out what has everyone else so worked up. And then he says, I literally can't tell you what we're looking for. And everybody's like, you just told us. And then he looks up and is like, what? And he says, oh God, ask your spellbook if it did something to break the exile splinter's hold on your memories. And the book says, no, doesn't even know what that is. It did send me what feel like memories of you telling us all this before, and it being really confused about why we kept forgetting it. And Alustin freaks out and grabs a book and chucks it. I thought for a moment it was Hugh's book, and I was kind of like rude, but it's not. It's just a book. And finally he says, oh my God, I am sorry, but I really thought we had more time than this. Imperial Ithos apparently is returning a lot faster than we thought, if y'all are remembering conversations. Like, this is not how this is supposed to go. Normally, you can only remember if you've got some way to block the exile splinter's power, as Kandarin did for me, and even that doesn't do much more than let you know it exists and what its purpose is. it is powerful enough it purged every map of Ithos' location and any clue to Ithos' location in nearly every book on the planet. And then Hugh says, except for maybe, say, a book you got as a gift from Indris, perhaps? And I was like, oh, that makes sense. There are books that were in other universes and stuff when this thing went into play. And so they didn't get affected by the spell to make them forget. And he says before, when you read one of the books that escaped its influence, its information just slipped out of your mind. But as it started failing, we were able to do it. Imperial Havath is at least as close to finding it as we are, which we do know that there's a whole thing with Havath, but we still don't know what that's about. So everybody leaves here, and this is when Sabae stays behind and is just like, so what happened here was a coup. And all of Loarna's wards seem designed to lead Bakori and his imp through sections of the mountain, through filled with members of her rival counselors' factions. And so far as I can tell, no one seems to know about them, and we wouldn't even know if Hugh hadn't figured it out. Which I was thinking that this was all purely to direct Bakori to where they needed him to go. But again, he was going there anyway, so that wouldn't make sense. So I really liked that detail a lot, because I was like, I really thought that I got the ways that he was being like lured, and it turns out he was heading in a direction he wanted, whether he was lured or not. And just a lot of things were put in place to make that go a certain way, or try and make it go a certain way, and then was completely foiled by a bunch of apprentices. And I think your most recent mission might have taken you on a path quite close to a certain sleeping elemental's home caldera, just a short time before it mysteriously started waking up. I have a lot of doubts about whether this was the least bloody way of baiting Bakori out of the labyrinth Kandaron had available to her. I think this outcome, or one like it, with her enemies and unreliables on the council either dead or discredited, is exactly what Kandaron was aiming for. She knew what everyone wanted and used that info to manipulate everybody. And she's cleaning house. And I was just like, that makes sense. And I love it. Honestly, I don't fully trust Kandaron. For all I know, she could wind up being a baddie herself. But as of right now, I just gotta respect it. You know? Like, and Kandaron wanted to make sure her affairs were in order before Imperial Ithos returned, so she didn't have to worry about threats within and without. And he, in response, pulls a deck of cards out of the air and gives them to her. And it was a weird thing where I was expecting this to, like, for her to open the cards and them to mean something specific. We don't actually get that here. It's like, I'm not sure if she's going to open them later, or if it's supposed to be a message that I don't understand, or I'm missing something. But when she asks what's in Imperial Ithos that has everyone so up in arms, he just gives her a look before he leaves the room, and he doesn't answer. So I'm going to go ahead and say, like, whatever the fucking language affinity thing that can destroy entire groups of people, that might be it. I don't know. I feel like Havath might be wanting to do some stuff. I'm worried about it. So, last chapter, breathing room. Ava breaks up with Hugh. And this was a really interesting bit here. And I'm, like, personally kind of glad, because I really didn't care about him and Ava. Like, I was glad that the awkward boy was able to have a relationship that was, like, fun and healthy and with a girl he really liked, like sometimes that sort of thing is dragged out for drama, and I don't need that. But I don't really feel like I know Ava that well. And even though there's been attempts to give her like some distinct parts of her personality, she hasn't really become a full person in my head, I have to admit. So I'm fine with her being sort of not a factor for right now. I don't know if she'll come back, but Talia gives Hugh a hug and then tracks Ava down. And they have this really interesting conversation that I loved so much. So at first, when Ava realizes Talia's following her, she's like, what, are you going to fucking make fun of me? Or are you going to like tell me I'm not good enough for Hugh and you always knew it? And then all of a sudden she starts crying and just hugs Talia and is like, I'm so sorry. You saved my life. I'm so sorry. I'm just really upset. And Talia, I do like this moment. A nasty, jealous little part of Talia gloated about how Ava wasn't so pretty right now. But Talia shoved that thought aside too. And look, is it an unfortunate stereotype that girls are always in competition with each other? Yes. But are there some elements of truth to that, especially when you maybe have feelings for somebody that you're trying to sort out and they're dating another person and yeah, you do compare yourself? Yes. Like, this moment of her having this nasty thought and then making a conscious effort to push it out, that is really a thing that I didn't learn to do until much later in my life than Talia is learning to do it. So like, good for her, because it's a thing where I think that nowadays there's much healthier messaging surrounding this in a lot of ways. But in the 90s, it was like, basically a girl's entire worth was based on how much boys liked her. And so all of your worth was dependent on male attention. And so you would just wind up comparing yourself because that was the only way you knew how to measure if you were like succeeding or not as a woman. And then obviously I'm talking about straight women here. Although maybe not exclusively, I guess. But anyway, it was something that I fell into a lot, and it took a long time for me to sort of unlearn that behavior. And that was even with like regarding guys I wasn't really interested in. And I hope that a lot of our messaging today regarding the worth of young women is really making it clear that like dudes aren't worth it, and that's not what you should be aiming for. However, there is still power there, and I can't deny that. But I just like, there's something I read somewhere, which was the thought that you first have is what you have been conditioned to think. And the next thought you have is who you really are. So her attempt to shove that out of her head and not be nasty is who Talia really is, and I love this. So anyway, Ava is just like, look, I dumped Hugh because I was really scared when we were at the city in Theristel and all this shit went down. But I thought that was a fluke and that we had just gotten caught up in this thing. And then this happened. And y'all were like actively looking for a traitor. And it was just so inappropriate for like who you all seemed to be as like apprentices. And then I started to realize like, no, this is what you're gonna live like. And I'm not up for it. I'm sorry. I'm just not. It's so scary. It's just not what I want. And Hugh is like, amongst you and your very competent friends. And he needs to be partnered with somebody who is up for it, who is brave and willing to take risks and do all of this stuff. And she says he deserves someone like you. And Talia starts to argue. And she's like, I've seen how you look at him. Everybody knows it. And Talia's like, all right, first, I don't like him that way, I don't think. It's hard for me to tell. I go back and forth. I really don't know how I feel about him. Setting that aside, though, you're calling me fearless, and that is absolutely fucking not true. I am scared all the time about everything and very self-conscious always. And I am very good at destroying things, and I like it, and I'm good at it. But sometimes I think that the only way to keep myself from being vulnerable is to play into that aspect of who I am and make it like that's all I am. Because I don't want to talk about my emotions. I don't want to talk with my friends about like being scared of shit. And you can do that. You're out here just crying. And I'm like, people would call me your enemy. And you're just like telling me how you're feeling right now. I can't do that. I don't know how to do this. And you were like part of our group of friends all of a sudden, no problem. And I'm jealous of your confidence and the fact that you aren't as insecure as I am. And Talia, bless your heart. I love you so much. I know bless your heart is often used as just like a fuck you. But no, I really mean it when I say it most of the time. I mean it. Bless your heart, because you're trying. You are trying. And she says, sometimes I think I like him like that, and sometimes I think I'm just feeling protective of him and getting that confused for liking him. I always thought I'd fall for some invincible warrior, some invulnerable mage that was an immovable object to my unstoppable force. And Hugh might be my best friend in the world, but he's far from invulnerable, if you know what I mean. And finally, Talia's like, if you tell anybody that I told you I was insecure, I'll burn your whole family ship. So just not kidding though. I really did like this moment so much. I just like that they are given the chance to talk and straighten things out between them, because I'm not mad at girls being jealous of one another in a story as a rule, like flat out. That is a thing that can happen. But giving them the chance to work through this and acknowledge that that's a real thing that's happening and why, that's much, much more interesting. So, yeah, this was very gratifying and gives you more depth to both of their characters. So we go to Godric and Arthur. They're talking about Hugh being depressed. And Godric, he broke up with his boyfriend and his dad is a little worried about him, and Godric assures him it's totally fine. Then we go to Sabae and her grandmother is like, man, no arranged marriage for you. Your mother already ruined a bloodline, so you can marry whoever. It doesn't matter. And she says, I thought about finding you a marriage. I just didn't have the heart for it. I lost my daughter for years over trying to force her into a marriage she didn't want. And I missed out on so much of your childhood. I just don't have it in me to arrange a marriage for you two. But you're fine with it for my cousins. Elinia waved her hand in the air, tiny lightning bolts trailing her cloud fingers. Sabae eyed her dubiously, but she let that one pass. And I kind of feel like, she cares about all of her family, but she's got her favorites, and that's just like how she is. And I can understand that. But then says, but you do owe me grandbabies. And I was like, oh boy. So as long as Sabae either doesn't wind up gay, or if she's gay, still manages to get knocked up somehow, no pressure. And Sabae says, I'm going to sell all of your secrets, even the name of that little shop you buy your awful romance novels at. But her grandmother is laughing, and I do like this. So then she comes back to herself. We're with Elinia now. And she says, you can both come out now. Candoran Crux emerged from nowhere. Elinia wondered idly how many people had noticed that the depression Candoran had worn in her spot for council meetings had remained almost entirely untouched, save for a little dried lava that had been scraped out easily. And I didn't notice, so I'll just say that. And so we've got Indris and Elinia and Candoran all together. And Indris, how did things go on your end? Shellis Mott still refuses to join us, but he did at least agree to keep the peace in the Endless Erg if the situation requires. The lesser powers of the Erg have all agreed to behave themselves over the next few years. And Alinea doesn't really buy that, but she's like, I guess we'll just have to keep an eye on this. But Shellisma is that big turtle. Indris made sure things will stay nice and peaceful, and I've dealt with your nasty little demon problem. It's time to fulfill your side of the deal. And Kandarin says, all right, but doesn't seem super happy about it. A rush of light flowed through Kandarin's crystal wings. Alinea turned towards the Skyreach range and watched with pleasure as answering blue lights flashed on several nearby peaks as, for the first time in the history of the Kandas family, Skyhold's great weather wards came down. Alinea reached out on the wind, her perception rushing over hidden valley after mountain after waterfall. As the Great Barrier fell, it felt like an itch she hadn't been able to scratch had vanished, like a box that had been around one limb her whole life had been removed. And this is just so she had been unable to like scry into the range entirely, I guess. So she asks then Kandarin, do you think your paper mage has any idea what's going on? And I love this so much. Kandarin says, I've burdened him with enough harsh truths. He won't reach for this one. Basically, like, he's got enough on his plate. And Alinea says, cryptic twaddle. I don't know why so many people get all pretentious when they get old. And Indris calls her a trashy old harridan. That's funny. And Alinea's like, look, I see what Alestin's doing, making my granddaughter and her friends into weapons. And I'm letting that happen because, like, she wasn't really able to use her abilities and now she can. And that's great. But I've got my eye on what the fuck is happening over here. This is shady and you have your own plan. And I know that's what's going on, that there is something I'm not in on here. So, Indris says, what if our fears for Imperial Ithos are realized? And Kandarin says, none of our plans matter, but the cold minds don't think like we do. And it's entirely likely they didn't even notice the bubble containing Imperial Ithos. 5 centuries is a blink of the eye to them, while they sleep in their dead universes. Don't love that. Not a fan. So, and it ends with Alinea Kandas, Stormguard of the South, yada, 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 was going to make sure the Kandas line didn't die with the world. So, we'll see what happens. We have an appendix here, which I'm not going to get into. I did not read this part in the audiobook, but I'll read it in the print. But I'm over time, so I have got to wrap. But yeah, this was a very fun ending, a satisfying ending. And like I said, it's one that a lot of it I saw coming, but there are still surprises, and even seeing things coming, it doesn't matter. So I really like this ending. I'm very eager to start the next book and see what the hell the deal is with Ithos. All right. Thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you to McShard for hanging out with me. Sorry to Dan if you had to miss this, but hopefully you're enjoying listening. And thank you for commissioning it. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.